At the cemetery, a man she'd never seen in 40 years was crying beside her husband's grave. Margaret couldn't bring herself to leave her late husband's resting place. The man turned to her, something familiar flickering in his eyes. Are you Robert's wife?" he asked, trembling. She'd never seen this man before, but somehow he seemed to know her. Margaret was 73 years old, but every Monday morning her feet never failed to take her down the same path. She would leave home at exactly 9 a.m., buy white carnations from Joe the florist at 9:15, and walk through the gates of Willowbrook Cemetery at 9:30. 40 years. A full 40 years of this routine she'd never missed. It was the only meaning left in her life. "Good morning, darling," she whispered to her husband Robert's headstone. As she carefully arranged the flowers, she continued, "I made your favorite tea again this morning. Of course, there was no one there to drink it with me." Silence. Just like always. Margaret knelt down and cleaned the dust from the headstone. She traced the letters with her fingertips. Robert Mitchell, 1935 to 1983. The same letters, the same love, every single week. But today, something was different. When Margaret lifted her head, her breath caught. About 20 yards away, on the side of the cemetery, an elderly man stood crying. This alone wasn't unusual. Seeing people cry at cemeteries was commonplace, but this man was different. He looked like he had found something he'd been searching for. Margaret noticed the man slowly walking toward her. Her heart began to race. In 40 years of coming to Willowbrook Cemetery, no one had ever visited her husband's grave. Robert's friends had long since died or moved to other cities. The man drew closer. Margaret could now see his face clearly. He was in his 70s, with white hair and a face marked by deep lines. But his eyes, there was something familiar about his eyes. "Excuse me," the man said, trembling. His voice was broken, as if he hadn't spoken in a long time. Are you Robert's wife?" Margaret's world spun. How did this man know her husband? And more importantly, how did he recognize her? "Yes," Margaret replied, her voice mixing surprise and fear. "I'm Margaret, Robert's wife. Who are you?" The man looked at her for several seconds, then turned to examine Robert's headstone. Tears streamed down his cheeks. I'm William," he said quietly. "William Thompson. Robert and I served together in the military." Margaret's heart began pounding. Robert had talked about his military friends, but she'd never heard him mention anyone named William. Or had he, and she'd forgotten. "Military service?" she asked. "What period?" Robert served in Vietnam in 1975. William's expression changed. He stood as if carrying a very heavy secret. "Yes," he said slowly, 1975, during the final days of Saigon, but he paused, then continued. "But there was something else between us." Margaret struggled to remain standing. "What do you mean, something else?" "Robert told me everything." William shook his head. "No, ma'am, he wouldn't have. He wouldn't have because they made us swear that day. We would never tell anyone, absolutely no one, what we experienced." "What did you experience?" Margaret's voice had lost its steadiness. William pulled an old photograph from his pocket, yellowed with worn edges, a black and white photograph. He handed it to Margaret. When she looked at the photo, her breath stopped. In the photograph were two young soldiers. One was definitely Robert. She'd recognize him anywhere. The other must be the young version of this elderly man standing before her. "This photograph," William said in a shaky voice, "was taken on our last day, the day I saved Robert's life." Margaret held the photograph with both hands, as if afraid of dropping it. "You saved his life?" she whispered. William nodded. It was the final days of 1975. Robert and I were on guard duty in Saigon. At midnight, there was an attack. Enemy soldiers approached our base. Robert was sleeping at the time. He didn't notice. He paused, taking a deep breath. "I saw them. They were advancing toward Robert's tent. I quietly woke him, and we hid together. That night we came very close to death. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Her husband had never mentioned this event. But what happened afterward? Why did you never appear? Robert never mentioned you. William's face creased with pain. Because after that day I was transferred to Chicago, I made a promise to Robert. If we both make it out of this alive, I want you to be happy with your family without me remaining as a memory in your life. But why did you come now? Margaret asked. After 40 years? William lowered his eyes. Because last month I also lost my wife. It was a 45-year marriage. When she died, I thought of Robert. I became curious, wanted to learn how he was doing. He paused, then continued. I came here from Chicago and asked around the old neighborhood. The neighbors told me Robert had died in 1983. A heart attack. That's when I realized I had lost my best friend 40 years ago and never knew. Margaret's tears could no longer be stopped. 40 years, William repeated. For 40 years I searched for him in phone books, but I thought he might have changed his last name. It never occurred to me that he was already... William turned to Margaret. Ma'am, I didn't come here today just to see Robert. I came to give you something. He pulled something else from his pocket. This time, it was a letter. Old, yellowed letter. Robert gave me this letter in 1975. He said, if something happens to me, give this to my wife. I thought I would see him again. Until today. Margaret took the letter with trembling hands. Her own name was written on it. To my beloved Margaret. When she opened the letter, she was met with Robert's familiar handwriting. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this letter, it means I'm no longer by your side. I want you to know that the most beautiful days of my life were with you. If my brother William has been able to give you this letter, it means he hasn't forgotten me either. William saved my life. But more importantly, he's the reason I was able to come home and marry you. Please accept him as part of our family. I love you so much, Robert. After reading the letter, Margaret couldn't speak for a long time. Finally, she looked at William. 40 years, she said slowly. For 40 years, I came here alone. It never occurred to me. It never occurred to me that Robert might have had other people who loved him. William nodded. For 40 years, I thought he was still alive. Every birthday, every holiday, I thought of him. They both silently looked at Robert's grave. William, Margaret said, I won't be coming here alone on Monday mornings anymore. Will you come with me? William's face smiled for the first time. Of course I will, ma'am. Of course I will. Over the following weeks, William and Margaret began meeting regularly, not just at the cemetery, but for coffee, for walks, for quiet conversations about Robert and the memories they both cherished. William shared stories Margaret had never heard, how Robert would write letters to her every night in Vietnam, how he carried her photograph everywhere, how he talked about their future together with such hope and determination. He was the bravest man I knew, William said one afternoon as they sat on a bench overlooking the cemetery. But when it came to you, he was just a lovesick young man counting the days until he could come home. Margaret learned things about her husband she'd never known. His fears, his dreams, the way he protected other soldiers, the respect he commanded among his unit. There was this one time, William continued, when our supplies were running low. Robert gave his rations to a younger soldier who was sick. When I asked him why, he said, "That boy has his whole life ahead of him. I have Margaret waiting for me. That's all the strength I need." But their growing friendship also brought pain. William carried guilt he'd never shared with anyone. "I should have come sooner," he admitted one day, his voice heavy with regret. "I should have found him. I should have been at his funeral. I should have been there for you." Margaret reached over and took his weathered hand. "You were there for him when it mattered most. You brought him home to me. That's what I'll always remember. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found solace in shared memories and mutual understanding. You know, Margaret said softly, I think Robert would be happy. He always said he wanted me to have friends, to not be alone. I think he'd approve of our friendship. William squeezed her hand gently. I think you're right. And I think he's probably laughing at how long it took us to find each other. And so, after 40 years, two old friends were reunited. One lay beneath the earth, the other stood beside his grave. But most importantly, the two hearts Robert had left behind were no longer alone. Margaret returned home that day, smiling with hope for the first time in years. She knew that the following Monday, she would find William waiting at the gates of Willowbrook Cemetery. Because true friendship doesn't end with death. It simply takes new forms. This story reminds us that the precious people we think we've lost in life are never truly gone. They continue to live in our hearts, and sometimes, in the most unexpected moments and in the most unexpected ways, they appear before us again.